Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murdered three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I have to push 3 buttons and click 2 gadgets to get the show rolling. That's why there's a bit of a lag on the videos. I don't have any tech support, so it's me and the cats doing everything. The dogs just sit there and watch. A lot of folks said they like seeing me as I talk about strange things, so until something comes up, I'll be doing videos as well as podcasting. I still say I have a face for radio and a voice for print. That's from Ian Punnett. Was it something I said? Canada suddenly shot way ahead in listeners, followed by folks in Australia moving up and passing them. I'm not complaining, just trying to grow my audience. Why do I focus on Canada and Australia so much? Well, I know John Kirk and David Scott, and they both live up in Canada. A funny thing is, I met both of them in Jefferson, Texas. What are the odds of running into 2 guys from Canada in a small town in Texas at a Bigfoot conference? Of course, that's why they were there. I like listening to the Aussie Man. Some of y'all will recognize that. He's the guy that says, "Here's me face." He has that god-awful Steve Irwin accent. He has a show, videos that, well, they're not exactly age appropriate. They're for an adult audience only. He has something called Destination, I'm not going to say it. I'm going to borrow this from Tony Merkel. If you enjoy the show, share it. I don't care how you share it. Send it to your friends. Send it to your relatives. Send it to people you don't even know. But share it and see what happens. Either they'll stop talking to you or they'll start listening to me. One of the two. I finally got a Twitter account. The link is @strange _with, or whatever that thing is called, the underline thing, underscore. That's it. @strange _with. I didn't pick the name. I was just given what they had. There's a lot of people out there with strange thing in their title. If you're into twitting, there it is. That's mine. I can only post MP3s because the videos are too long. At least that's what they tell me. I guess you can only do like a 5-minute video, and, well, all mine are an hour. Sometime in March or April 1974, 3 members of the Betz family, Jerry, Anton Betz, and their oldest son, Terry, a 21-year-old medical student, were walking in the woods around their property on Jacksonville's Fort George Island. There had been a brush fire, and they were checking the damage to their property. Terry, the med student, found something that nobody could explain. Nobody expected to find it laying there. He found a strange metallic sphere, about the size of a bowling ball. They all looked the object over, and they came to no conclusions as to what it might be, so Terry took the thing home with him. The orb was simply an oddity, something to look at and wonder about. It sat on a shelf, and it drew questions, like any good curiosity should. One day, Terry was strumming his guitar. As the music played, he became aware of an odd humming sound. When he stopped playing his guitar, the humming sound stopped. He began playing once more, and the humming commenced. It didn't take long to figure out that this sound was coming from inside the sphere. It wasn't very loud, but it was very noticeable. One day, the sphere began rolling around on its own. The round ball would begin to roll along the floor, and then it would change directions. That's an important thing to keep in mind. It changed directions and began rolling in another direction. Nobody could explain this. There was no slope to the floor, and nobody had touched it. There was no wind blowing, no fans on in the room. But all of a sudden, this orb just decided to roll around on its own. When placed on a table, the ball would roll around to the very edge, and never falling off. It would always turn as it came to a corner. It would go around until it wound up sitting in the center of the table, as if realizing that was the safest place to sit. On occasion, the orb would emit a high-pitched sound that would drive their dog nuts. The dog would run away to the farthest room possible and hide under any furniture that it could, trying to get away from this weird orb. Anytime friends would come by, the sphere would be brought out and shown as an oddity that it was. The Burnett family, close friends of the Betzes, came by, and they all looked at the ball, wondering what it was and where it could have come from. One of the kids walked past it, and the ball began to roll along behind him, as if it was following him. This kind of freaked the kid out a lot. If a magnet was placed on the sphere, it would only stick in some places. It was as if the ball was made from some non-ferrous metal with magnetic parts inside. One day, Terry Betz tried thumping the sphere with a hammer, and he heard a ringing sound, kind of like a bell. This made everybody in the family think that perhaps the orb was hollow, kind of like the moon. Jerry Betz contacted the local Jacksonville Journal. Halloween was coming up, and the paper wanted some odd stories, so the Journal was intrigued by their story, and they sent a photographer, Lon Enger, to get the story and take a few photos. Enger was skeptical of the story that he'd been sent to cover. He took the assignment because, well, that was his job, but he told a co-worker that he had a feeling that he was stepping into a den of crackpots. Enger arrived at the Betz home, and he was greeted by Jerry, who wasted no time presenting him with the sphere. He said, "When I got there, Mrs. Betz said, 'You won't believe this if you don't see it.' She set the sphere on the floor, and she told me to give it a push. The sphere rolled away, and then it came to a stop. It sat still for a bit, and Enger, well, he said he was not that impressed. Jerry told him to wait and see what was about to happen. The sphere turned to the right, and then it rolled in that direction. It came to a halt. It turned to the left, and it rolled for about 8 feet. Then it began to roll in kind of an arch. The sphere wound up sitting at Enger's feet, where it had started. Enger examined the steel ball intently, and like the Betz family before him, could find no seams, no indication of any manufacturer on the surface, save for a triangular symbol that seemed to be stamped on one side, a very small triangle. As soon as the photographer relayed his fantastic story to his editor, the paper wasted no time publishing his account, and within days, a worldwide media firestorm was ignited. Reporters from publications like the New York Times, the London Daily, and dozens of other papers from as far away as Japan called, or they simply showed up at St. George Island to see the mystery sphere with their own eyes. Reporters from publications like the New York... I said that, didn't I? The Betz Sphere had a few new names, such as the Mystery Sphere or the Oddball. I wonder if it was given after that character from Kelly's Heroes, one of my all-time favorite movies. Ron Kivett, the host of a local radio show on paranormal phenomena, was one of the first to come by the Betz home and look the sphere over closely. Kivett, who also has a place in local lore as one of the writers of a locally produced cult monster movie called Zat. And I must admit I did watch it. He confirmed what the Betzes had said, that the sphere moved and behaved strangely all on its own. He, like many others after him, was convinced that the orb was extraterrestrial, a device created by some cosmic intelligence from some unknown place. The movie Zat is a 1971 American science fiction horror film written, produced, and directed by Don Barton. Zat received a lot of criticism, directed at the film's script, acting, and poor monster design. It was finally shown on a TV show that I watch a lot called Mystery Science Theater 3000 in May 1999. That's where you get all your best lousy horror movies. Kivett wanted to examine the sphere, and so Betz placed the ball in the center of a glass-top table. The surface of the orb was scratched as if it had crashed to Earth a while ago. Looking closer, it appeared as if the scratches may have formed a pattern or some kind of an image. Kind of like a star map. Kivett said he wanted to get some photographs of the orb, and he suggested taking it outside. That sounds like a threat, really. Let's take it outside. Well, if you ever hear somebody say that in a bar, if you hang out in that kind of a bar, well, not good. Anyway, he suggested taking the sphere outside. The ball rolled to the edge of the table in the direction of the front door, as if saying, "Let's go already." When asked if his writing science fiction stories influenced his take on the sphere, Kivett said, "Not at all. Just because he was interested in a subject doesn't make him a biased researcher," which is true. As if having the mystery ball in their home, drawing attention from all over the world, wasn't enough, the family began experiencing something really weird. Jerry Betz reported that she and her family began to hear organ-like music, as if somebody was playing in the middle of the night. There was no organ in their home. There were no houses or buildings within miles that might have had such an instrument. The music was coming from empty rooms. Doors would slam shut all on their own. The family would be all together in one room when a door would slam shut in the hall or at the other end of the house. This activity was going on at all hours of the day and night. With little recourse to figure this new anomaly out, they all just accepted this as being one more thing to live with and try to ignore if possible. The family said they weren't so much afraid of this poltergeist-like activity as annoyed by it. They tried to find somebody that might figure out what was causing the sounds and if they might be related to the sphere. By mid-April, the Betz Sphere had also drawn the attention of other news agencies. The Jacksonville Journal, the Florida Times-Union began covering the sphere, and they interviewed Jerry Betz about the thing. According to Lindsay Kilbride, a reporter for the Jackson Partner, WJCT, and the host of a podcast about the sphere captured people's curiosity. Kilbride said, around that time, UFOs were really popular. Within 1 or 2 weeks of it making headlines locally, it became a national story, and there were even international publications that picked up on it. In the spring of 1974, reporters from around the world were asking, what is this crazy thing down in Jacksonville, and where did it come from? With curiosity at a fevered pitch, the U.S. Navy wanted to look at the Betz Sphere. Being a shrewd businesswoman, Jerry wrote up a contract that gave the Navy 2 weeks to inspect the orb at the naval station Mayport and committed them to return it if it turned out not to be government property. At first, the Navy said there was something very bizarre about the sphere, and it might have been some kind of listening device. The initial efforts of the Navy metallurgists were met with dead ends as their X-ray machines were not strong enough to penetrate the orb. According to Navy spokesman, CPO Chris Berninger, he said, "Our first X-ray attempts got us nowhere. We're going to use a more powerful machine on it and also run spectrograph tests to determine what metal it's made of. There's certainly something odd about it." Eventually, the scientists at the station were able to determine that the exact size of the sphere was 7.96 inches and that it weighed 21.34 pounds. They also concluded that the shell of the orb was approximately 1/2 inch thick, which, according to the report, could withstand a pressure of 120,000 pounds per square inch, and was made of stainless steel, specifically magnetic ferrous alloy number 431. The alloy is magnetic, a nickel-bearing stainless steel designed for heat treatment to the highest mechanical properties and corrosion resistance. The Navy team's new, more powerful 300 kilovolt X-ray also discovered there were 2 round objects inside the sphere, surrounded by what looked like a halo, made of the material with an unusually high density. They discovered the sphere displayed 4 different magnetic poles, 2 positive and 2 negative, which were not concentric. The Navy concluded that while the orb was intensely magnetic, it did not show signs of radioactivity, and it didn't appear to be explosive. At this point, the Navy scientists wanted to cut into the object to get a better look, but Jerry Betz steadfastly refused, stating to the press, "I told them we expect a comprehensive report in 2 weeks, and if it can't be identified as government property, it is to be returned to us." In a news report following their examination, the Navy spokesman stated they'd found only that the ball was stainless steel, was not their property, and that while they couldn't determine what it was for, it had to have been made on the Earth. The Navy suggested that its tendency to move around was due to a small triangular mark in the surface that threw off its otherwise perfect balance, and the fact that the Betz's floors were uneven. I'll bet nobody from the Navy went to the Betz's home with a level or any kind of a surveying equipment to determine this. They just made the statement. The ball was returned to the Betz family by 2 Navy personnel, an officer and an enlisted man. As the ball was being handed over, well, there was a phone call from the Navy base. Keep in mind, this was the 70s, no such thing as cell phones yet. The person on the phone wanted to talk to the officer. The conversation wasn't overheard, but at its conclusion, the officer stated that the Navy wanted the ball returned to the base. Jerry Betz told them the deal had been they could examine the sphere for 2 weeks, and if it wasn't government property, the family would get it back. She refused to hand the sphere back to the 2 Navy guys. Why the Navy had changed their minds at the last minute was never clarified. They only said they wanted it back, but not why. A week later, some scientists, the boys in the white lab coats, called from South Florida and asked to be allowed to check out the ball. Jerry sent the ball to the lab, escorted by her 2 younger sons. They were to bring the ball back as soon as the lab folks were finished. Once the scientists got a hold of the sphere, they refused to hand it back. The 2 sons had to drive back home empty-handed. Then they had to face their mother. It took a lot of phone calls and maybe a few threats before the ball was finally returned. A new question came up. The family began to wonder if the ball they now had was the same one they had sent to the scientists. Being a sphere, there was no real way to identify it, or if there were more than one. There were no markings other than that little triangle, and there were no numbers or any identification. Just a shiny, round sphere. To begin with, if I found anything that might be extraterrestrial, I wouldn't let any government agency in the same building with it. I know a few folks I'd invite to examine it and try to determine what the object might be. As far as lab work goes, I'd need to find a lab with a reputation for open-mindedness. Just about every lab in the world would come out and say, there's nothing to see here. Move along. Pay no attention to that. Well, you get the idea. Just look at how many times people find evidence of otherworldly items or hair, say, from a cryptid, only to be told it's just some common thing found all over the place. Other scientists were next to take a crack at the mystery. Even J. Allen Hynek had heard the reports of the sphere, and he contacted the Betz family asking them to send him the sphere so he could examine it in his office. Jerry told him she didn't want to send the sphere because there was a huge chance it might get lost or stolen while being shipped. This was compounded by the scientists from the South Florida who had refused to return the sphere. As she was still wondering if the sphere she had was the same one her son had found in the brush near their home to begin with. April 13th, 1974, Dr. Carl Wilson, who was working with the Louisiana research firm known as Omega-1 Institute in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, showed up at the Betz home. He managed to convince them that he was legitimate in his wish to examine the ball. Dr. Wilson examined the sphere for 6 hours, and he discovered what was described as radio waves coming from the sphere and a magnetic field around it. Dr. Wilson confirmed the Navy's discovery of multiple poles within the sphere, and he claimed that this phenomena was mind-bending, as the flux density of the field appeared to fluctuate in potency based on as yet unknown patterns. Scientists, they just love to talk this way. This, he claimed, defied the known laws of physics. The doctor evidently went on to suggest that the material that made up the shell of the orb, while comparable to stainless steel, contained an unknown element, making it slightly different. Dr. Wilson also witnessed the sphere's ability to propel itself across surfaces and abruptly change direction, but was unable to determine a pattern in the movement, or explain how it is even possible. One of the theories posted was that it might be a damaged extraterrestrial probe, or perhaps even some sort of anti-gravitational device. In the end, the Omega-1 Institute findings regarding the identity of the mystery sphere were just as inconclusive as the Navy, and the Betz family were no closer to the truth. After this examination was concluded, members of APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, managed to convince the family that they might be in possession of evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and as such, they were legitimately eligible to win the National Enquirer's $50,000 reward for proof of UFOs. In today's money, this would be $375,000. I'd be on the phone to the National Enquirer immediately. The National Enquirer was convening a panel of 5 UFO investigators in New Orleans. Despite the paper's disreputable history, not the greatest rag going, each of the members of the scientific crew were either engineers or scientists of some sort. Among these scientists was to be J. Allen Hynek. The Enquirer flew Terry Betz and the sphere out so it could be investigated by the panel. Terry was under orders from his mom not to let the sphere out of his sight, not like those other 2 brothers. Eventually, Hynek and his colleagues were unimpressed with the ball, and they agreed with the Navy that it was just a man-made something or other. The National Enquirer, well, a lot of people don't realize this, but the man who rebranded it in 1952 had worked for the CIA. He left the intel community, which many say you never actually do, to run a tabloid magazine talking about the Bat Boy and strange things all over the planet. Despite how any mention of UFOs on the front cover would cause sales to drop, the man insisted on running UFO stories as often as possible. The Enquirer examination leads me to believe that maybe the sphere might have been replaced by those guys in South Florida, or maybe the Navy. By the time J. Allen Hynek had come to the conclusion the military wasn't telling the truth about UFOs and there was something going on around us worth investigating. Keep in mind, Hynek was an astronomer, not a physicist. Then again, the orb might have been made here on Earth, but for some unknown extraterrestrial use. One story that started going around was the sphere was made for the paper production industry and was used to grind up pulp. The balls used for this purpose tend to have welded seams visible. Their spheres are made using 2 halves which then get welded together. The Betz Sphere has no seams. Most of the paper production balls are made out of aluminum, so they're lighter and cheaper than stainless steel. There's no need for high heat resistance in a paper production field. There are a few paper plants in Florida, but how and why would any of their equipment wind up in a field outside Jacksonville? The naysayers came out with a truck hauling paper production equipment was driving by, and a part of their load fell off. Just one part, one steel ball, which then rolled hundreds of feet from the road, through the brush, through a uneven terrain, coming to a halt in the field. Something else to keep in mind, the National Enquirer stood to lose $50,000 should the sphere be from outer space. If it was proof of UFOs, someone was going to have to write a big check. I don't think the scandal sheet was really looking for answers. They were looking to sell papers. If the panel came out and said there was nothing to be discovered looking at a steel ball, the Enquirer would still sell a lot of newspapers. Only if the object was part of a UFO would they wind up shelling out cash instead of taking it in. Just a thought. You get a bunch of scientists together and you put them up in a fancy hotel. You feed them and you give them some drinks. Maybe you give them a few drinks before they examine the sphere. You put the sphere in a negative light right from the get-go. Is it any surprise the boys in the white lab coat would come out saying the ball was just a ball? Nothing to see here, move along. Dr. Wilson had used all kinds of electronic gadgets to do his study. We have no record of what kind of tests were done at the behest of the Enquirer. Once the New Orleans study had come to their conclusion, the Betz family were contacted by Dr. James Albert Harder, a professor emeritus of civil and hydraulic engineering at the University of California at Berkeley. He had been following the reports on the sphere and was chomping at the bit for a chance to have a go of his own. Dr. Harder was the APRO consulting engineer. The Betz family allowed him to examine the thing, the results of which were disconcerting, to say the least. Dr. Harder commented that an X-ray of the sphere should result in a donut-shaped representation. However, the Navy X-ray showed two internal spheres after the 300 kilovolt X-ray bombardment, rendering the shell invisible. This indicated that the internal material is denser than the stainless steel. This would mean a substantial portion of the weight is the internal material, and the shell could be a lot thinner than a half an inch. In an announcement made at the International UFO Congress in Chicago on June 24, 1977, Dr. Harder presented his findings regarding the Betz sphere. He said, based on his X-ray studies, the two internal spheres are made of elements far heavier than anything known to scientists. While the heaviest element yet produced in any atomic reactor here on Earth has the atomic number of 105, and the heaviest element occurring naturally on Earth is uranium, with an atomic number of 92, Harder claimed to have determined that the Betz sphere has atomic numbers higher than 140. Each element is identified by the number of protons in its nucleus. The more protons, the higher the atomic number. If one were to drill into the sphere, he asserted, perhaps the mass would go critical and explode like an atomic bomb. As if this weren't potentially dire enough, Harder went on to warn the assembled audience of scientists and UFO investigators that any attempt to discern the contents of the sphere might unintentionally set it off, or kind of like hitting an atomic bomb with a hammer. Or worse yet, it might offend the extraterrestrial creators. Because of this danger, and because of the object is still presumably under surveillance by its alien makers, Harder warned the audience against any attempt to go to Florida to investigate the Betz sphere. It went unreported whether or not the Betz family concurred with Dr. Harding, potentially apocalyptic conclusion, but it is difficult to believe that they were not at least a little anxious about the potentially devastating effects a tampering with their family's favorite mystery ball might cause. It is at about this time that the stories surrounding the mystery sphere, and not to mention the object itself, seem to fade from the public eye. As the years have slipped into decades, two primary questions have haunted investigators. The big question, the million-dollar question was, did Terry Betz and his parents actually stumble across an alien artifact that day, or is there a more prosaic explanation for it? Some of the more mundane hypotheses proposed have ranged from the sphere being an extra-large ball bearing, to a paper mill valve, to a cryonics storage device used to keep humans in a state of suspended animation, in something called a Dwyer flask. No, it's a Dewar flask. Time for a rant. I know y'all are looking forward to me getting off on a sidetrack. Cryonics is the freezing of things. Cryogenics is the production and the behavior of the materials at very low temperatures. It's that part of the word, genics, that gets people confused. Cryonics is doing it, while cryogenics is the production of it. I just love it when the boys in the white lab coats use the wrong words. They'll say, it's a cryogenics lab storing dead people. There, okay, there's the end of my rant. Some folks will try anything short of saying there's a UFO. Even today, with the Pentagon coming out saying those things aren't ours and they're not theirs, people will roll their eyes at the mere mention of flying saucers. I still get those looks from people when I ask them if they've ever seen a flying saucer or a UFO. The fact both the Marines and the Navy denied ownership of the device is noteworthy, especially in light of the fact that in the years that would follow, there would be numerous investigators, including UFO investigator Roland Story, who would suggest the object might have been a sea bottom marker, which was used to assist missile-launching submarines by giving them stable points of reference for ballistic calculations. According to Story, the Navy's failure to identify the sphere could be due to the need-to-know restrictions relating to classified devices. Having the sphere on a Navy base for 2 weeks, and with all the press talking about it, somebody with that need to know should have shown up at the lab and confiscated the thing, since it was supposed to be a secret device used to help fire missiles. You know, those big atomic things that blow up cities? It would be right up there with somebody having a Norden bomb sight in their possession back in 1943. The Betz family said if the sphere belonged to the government, they would have relinquished any claim to it. All the Navy needed to do was say, it's one of our gadgets that fell out of a plane last year, and that would have been the end of the whole story. In another line of thought, people began saying the Navy had switched to the sphere with some random metal ball that looked just like the Betz Sphere. The outer shell was not the secret item. It was on the inside that was important. The Navy scientists could have opened the sphere, pulled out the innards, replaced them with something the same weight, and then returned the ball to the Betz family. Had this been the case, why did the Navy call the two men returning the sphere and tell them not to hand it over? Why did they want it back? The only thing I can think of is good scripting. Hand this thing over to that bunch, and then we'll call you and say get it back. This would make anybody not in the know believe the sphere was still worth hanging on to. It's just a thought. These conclusions coming out of New Orleans did nothing to stop public interest in the sphere, and eventually the Betz family had had enough. They were getting phone calls at all hours of the day and night, people wanting to ask questions or even look at the orb. People would come by the house uninvited, asking to be allowed to look at the thing. A year and a half after the orb became national news, the family simply stopped talking about it. The sphere fell out of general public interest after a few more weeks. The Betz family returned to their normal lives even though their family and the sphere were out of the media spotlight. They didn't stay quiet. Jerry was a business owner involved in real estate and trucking. Anton was a marine biologist. Jerry continued to be active in the community and was willing to talk about pretty much anything except that sphere. Not knowing what the thing was led to all kinds of ideas, many of which made little or no sense. According to the April 23, 1974 edition of the Ocala Star-Banner, a sculptor by the name of James Durling Jones claimed to have lost the orb when a cluster of them fell off the luggage rack of his Volkswagen bus while he was driving through the Jacksonville area around Easter 1971. He was on his way back home to Taos, New Mexico. Durling Jones asserted that he had gotten the industrial valve spheres from an anonymous friend who had procured the objects illegally. He further asserted that the rattling that the Betz claimed to hear within the sphere was due to the fact that the company manufacturing them had drilled holes into the object to allow metal chips to fall inside before re-welding them shut. This seemed to fly in the face of the fact that none of the experts who examined the orbs noticed any weld marks, and that the X-rays seemed to reveal distinct structures within the object. His testimony is further cast in doubt by the fact that the artist, ostensibly in an effort to protect his friend and his illicit activities, refused to name the company that manufactured the spheres, which might have put the whole thing to bed. But he didn't have that information. It sounds like somebody was just trying to make a story. Folks just have to voice their opinion, even if it makes no sense whatsoever. Some folks theorize that the sphere was a satellite from either Russia or China. This was why the Navy personnel couldn't identify it. It did look kind of like an old Russian spacecraft. A Sputnik was the first artificial Earth satellite. It was launched into an elliptical low Earth orbit by the Soviet Union October 4th, 1957, as a part of the Soviet space program. You know, the old space race that the Nazis won? I covered that in an earlier show. It's orbited for 3 weeks before its batteries ran out. The satellite then silently continued to orbit the planet for 2 months, before it fell back to the atmosphere on January 4th, 1958. The satellite was a 23-inch diameter sphere, which was assembled from 2 hemispheres that were hermetically sealed with O-rings and connected using 36 bolts. It had a mass of 184 pounds. The Betz sphere was about 8 inches in diameter, and it weighed 22 pounds. Technology would have advanced quite a lot from 1957 to 1974. A Sputnik had 4 antennas sticking out from its sides. Otherwise, it would have been on a wasted trip, since the whole reason for the satellite was to broadcast a signal. There was no indication of anything ever having been attached to the Betz sphere. The sphere was found in a brush fire, but it had no scorch marks from having entered through the atmosphere. One theory that came out does strike me as being a bit more believable. Maybe this is what a Foo Fighter looked like when it's sitting on the ground. The story of the Foo Fighters, seen by both sides in World War II, were never identified or explained. No one has ever come out and shown one sitting on the ground or in a lab somewhere. What would a ball of light look like, and what would it be made of? Some researchers, just maybe the Betz Sphere was what a Foo Fighter looked like when it wasn't glowing or flying around. Being alien technology, we wouldn't have a clue as to how it worked or what it made it go. Some physicists say that the lights seen in the sky at night just might be caused by the alien crafts using some form of a power source. Kind of like how you have a flame that lights things up. They use their energy, their power, to make their spacecraft move, and the resulting energy causes the glow. Nobody that believes in UFOs ever say that they have headlights and that's why we can see them. It's only the naysayers that come out and say, why do UFOs have lights? They're not lights, it's the glow from their energy. In his influential 1969 book, Chariots of the Gods, author Eric Van Daniken introduced the world at large to Robert Chorrow's theory that it might have been extraterrestrial atomic weapons that were responsible for the total destruction of the biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as other ancient disasters. According to Van Daniken, let us imagine for a moment that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed according to plan, i.e., deliberately, by a nuclear explosion. When I read that, I can hear his voice inside my head. I'm not even going to attempt his accent. I like listening to him on the TV shows. Supporters of the alien atomic bomb theory maintain that in the ancient past, extraterrestrials or possibly lost civilizations, such as Atlantis, managed to detonate nuclear weapons on Earth. The venerated Hindu epic known as the Mahabharata even describes a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns that rose up in all of its splendor. This sounds like an atomic explosion and its resulting mushroom cloud. The Mahabharata also refers to great battles being fought with ancient past with airships and beam weapons, which resembles some modern reports of UFO technology. Mainstream academics dismiss this theory out of hand. They don't believe it, so it can't be true. If Van Daniken were to come out and say breathing was good for us, the academics would all try holding their breath until they passed out. If this ball was some kind of alien weapon or bomb from the past, I sure hope nobody figures out how to set the thing off. I have a cough button here on the desk, and every time I have to cough, I push the button, and that's what makes that humming sound. I don't have a sphere sitting around here that I know of. I do have my cool Tick t-shirt, and I have my cool Tick action figure. It used to say things like evil is afoot and spoon whenever you push the button in the back. Yes, I have an eclectic lifestyle. On the episode of Ancient Aliens, none of the Betz family that appeared, let me rephrase that. On the episode of Ancient Aliens that came out in 2009, I believe it was, none of the Betz family made an appearance. I remember listening to Coast to Coast AM back in 2009, or maybe it was 10. There was a guy talking about his upcoming new TV show called Ancient Aliens. Georgios Tsoukalos said he just hoped a few people would watch. They're on season 18, and the show is on all day long on certain channels of the cable. The Betz Sphere was featured on a small portion of the show. It turned out that Jerry Betz had agreed to have the Ancient Aliens crew film the sphere, but she wanted nothing to do with it. She asked a close friend, Dick Barnett, to handle the show for them. He's the man whose son was being followed by that ball when they first found it. The sphere's attributes have grown in direct contrast to actual information about it. Today, websites will tell you that it's made of elements heavier than anything found on Earth, and that were it to be drilled into, it would explode with all the power of a nuclear weapon. In September 2019, Lindsay Kilbride of WJCT Public Media launched a podcast called Oddball, which is emerging as the most complete and comprehensive account of the Betz Sphere as well as the family. I listened to the podcast, and the show was sponsored by a coffee company. Just a bit of a quinky-dink. Bold Bean Coffee Roasters was their sponsor. And y'all know I have Organic Man Coffee Trike. Kilbride first encountered this story in Ancient Aliens when she saw it on TV. They didn't go very deep in the episode. They just sort of lay out what's already on the internet. And they basically say it's a UFO. Well, this story inspired her to do some digging. So far, Kilbride has combed through newspaper archives and old recorded interviews. She's interviewed people that are knowledgeable about the sphere and about the Betz family. She's answered a number of intriguing questions about the sphere, but she's also brought out a lot more questions than she answers. Did the Navy try to keep the ball? Did Dr. J. Allen Hynek quietly visit the Betz home and swap out the real sphere for a decoy? Where is the sphere today? Kilbride has uncovered enough new and old information on the orb to put her in the running for the most knowledgeable mystery sphere researcher in history, as she is equally interested in the human elements. As she talks about the lives of the Betz family and how before and after the sphere, how their lives had changed. As she also said, it's a really good Jacksonville story. The X-ray initially taken by the United States Navy at the Navy Air Station at Cecil Field during the first analysis of the sphere showed 3 equally spaced spherules, one of which is seemingly burst or radiating in the middle of the sphere itself, as well as the fact that it has varying densities of the interior. There appears to be an anomaly between the 6 and 7 o'clock position based on the X-ray. Since it's a sphere with no markings, there is no clock face to judge it by, so she can only do this according to the X-ray that she was looking at. A physician specializing in diagnostic radiology examined the X-rays from the Navy. He made a lot of scientific statements that do little to explain what the sphere is. The edges of the sphere show up in the X-ray. The outer layer looked to be made from steel and nickel, in other words, stainless steel. The smaller spheres seen inside more than likely are made from some other metal with a higher density. Otherwise, they wouldn't have shown up so dark. The margins of the sphere are not sharp. Usually, a metal object will have a very abrupt margin with where it shows up against the air. So why did the Betz sphere outer casing not show up as clear in the X-rays? He also said there's no way to calculate the density of the inner spheres based on the optical density of the image. The optical density is a function of the sensitivity of the film and the thickness and the type of X-ray intensifier screen used and the number of X-rays hitting the film cassette. Oh, he talked a whole lot of really big scientific words that I'm not even going to attempt. But if you want to hear the whole thing, check out the Oddball podcast and you'll hear everything he had to say. Jerry Betz had no reason to draw more attention to herself or her family, as she had started out with very little in the way of cash or property. Her soon-to-be ex-husband had bought an 18-wheeler, and he couldn't keep up the payments. Jerry had no idea on how to drive a truck or what to do with it, but she did manage to find somebody who was willing to work for her. She then began contacting companies in need of shipping and arranged transportation for them. Soon she discovered there were lots of companies wanting to hire her and her one truck. As she went to truck stops and she would talk to drivers about what they could do on their days off to make a few extra bucks. Soon she had a fleet of 9 18-wheelers that she owned, transporting cargo all over Florida. As money came in, Jerry would buy land. Soon she had acquired the house outside of Jacksonville. As she got involved in local politics, when the city council wanted to employ a private bus company at a higher cost than using the city bus company, Jerry got involved and managed to block the move. Made her real popular with the city council. Somebody wasn't going to get their bribe that year. She also tried to get the police a sizable raise. There was nothing to be gained by being associated with the Mystery Sphere. The Betz family home out in the middle of nowhere did gain a reputation as being haunted. People say they still hear organ music coming from inside. Also, even though the power has been off for some time, people driving by see lights in some of the windows and they hear voices coming from inside. The house was originally built in the 1920s for a family living in Chicago that never lived in it. The plans were drawn up making what looks like a castle. It even had a keep built to one side. That's a round tower for watching the countryside from. The mother died in a fire in Chicago. The son was found hanging in an orchard. Then the father committed suicide. None of them had ever been to the house. They never even visited it. Nobody lived in the house until the Betz family moved in the 60s, and no one has ever lived there since they left. Since 1974, there have been other spheres that have fallen to Earth or have been found in out-of-the-way places. None of these balls have been figured out yet. Still, just a mysterious bunch of round objects from who knows where. As for the Betz Sphere, it has vanished. No one knows where it was put or if the Betz family simply stuck it away in a secret hiding place. All the extra attention paid to the family over the few years they talked about the Mystery Sphere made their lives impossible. Some wanted to see the sphere and figure out what it may be, while others wanted to deride them for supposedly creating a hoax. It didn't take long for the family to decide the best thing to do was to not talk about the sphere for any more and to never show it in public again. For all we know, it might be in a box in somebody's garage, or maybe it's buried on the property before they left. If you like the show and you're willing to part with a few bucks, maybe you'd like to buy one of my books. You can find the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal, Paranormal Laredo, and Paranormal Stories, all at Amazon.com. Or maybe you'd like to buy a t-shirt from TeePublic or a coffee cup. These all make good gifts, and hey, Christmas is just, 7 months away. Now, for that weird uncle that you have that you just don't know what to buy him. Oh, my niece and nephews, I've already got all the t-shirts and coffee cups I need. If you're on YouTube and you like the show, go ahead and share it. It's up to you. I don't know how you can share the show from a podcast platform, but if you can figure it out, hey, send it. Let other people appreciate what you're listening to. If you'd like to contact me, I can be reached at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.